Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into the Joker series, and for this one we're doing kind of like part 7 and part 8 because I wanted to group together not only the origin of vengeance, but also the story leading up to it. So with that being said, let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch your spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so for this one, we're going to pick up from where Gordon was taken in by Interpol, with them finding his fingerprints at a murder scene in the secret lab, which on the surface is something that sounds just completely left field. But given the circumstance, it also sounds like the Joker just throwing Jim Gordon for a loop. But with Gordon being taken by Interpol and placed into this interrogation room, which for him he compares to like a theater play which he's played his part in a number of times over. And even though Chief Detective Elizabeth Howes has already told him that she didn't suspect that Gordon had murdered these scientists, she still plays the role here. Because when he starts off letting her know like, okay, I know you've been waiting behind that glass for an hour just watching, and reading his mannerisms to see if he's nervous or whatever, but he already knows that she's looked into his past at this point and she knows for sure that he didn't do this. And when she starts playing the role like, oh I don't, and Gordon just lets her know like, no you don't, because if you did and all this evidence on the table was just solid, he would have been locked up in Paris and it would have been a closed case, no need for questioning. But even with this happening, like between these two, there's a bit of like flirtation going on. So when Gordon calls her out, Detective Hollows, she kind of cuts out the act, and from there they get into the real reason of why she wanted to talk to Jim in the first place. Because at this point she's been very sparing with the details with Jim. But now that they've gotten all the small talk out the way, Gordon wants to know about the lab and he wants to know exactly what his fingerprints were on. And it's here where she lets him know that his fingerprints were found on a knife that just eviscerated 3 scientists, but even with that being the case, this attack matched a number of Joker attacks from Gotham. But after Detective Hollows tells Gordon about the knife, she then veers away from the topic, and right away Gordon knows that there's something about this lab that she's just not telling him. And when he asks her, she then sidesteps it again by questioning Gordon about what he knows about the group called the Network, which like we talked about before, this was the group that had offered like vacation homes to a number of criminals and or supervillains who wanted to get out the country and find somewhere to lay low for a while. And Detective Hollows asks Gordon if he found one of these places in Belize, and he tells her no, because the house he had found the Joker at, like we'd seen before, it wasn't one of the vacation homes which belonged to the Network. But for Gordon, after telling her this, he then goes back to the lab, because up to this point she's been sidestepping and just dancing around the topic. But this time when he asked her, she's straightforward with it, and part of the reasoning is because her questions prior were kind of leading into it. But it's here where she tells Gordon that this lab, they were cloning human tissue, which is illegal, which I think goes without saying. But Detective Howells, she believes that this lab was tied to the Network as like a part of their service, because she thinks that they're offering like a service to where like if someone wants to fake their death, the Network, they can clone a body and make it convincing. But Jim shuts that down. He's like, no, there's way easier ways to fake a death. Like nobody's going through all that trouble. And he lets her know here, rather than getting into the Network or who's connected to this lab as far as the reason it was established, but the more important thing that they need to focus on now is why the Joker wants this lab. Why does the Joker want to clone human tissue? And when Gordon says that, Detective Howell, she just shuts down the interrogation and she tells Gordon like, let's have a drink, so that from here they can then hash this out in a more conversational type of tone. And it gets pretty interesting as they flip to this conversation for a while, because for Detective Howells, who addresses Gordon right off the bat as Mr. Gordon, to where immediately he's then like, no, call me Jim, because once again there's a bit of this flirtation thing going on. But then right away she gets into the idea of how she doesn't necessarily love the fact that Gordon didn't tell the authorities that the Joker was in France, or even the mysterious way that he made his way to France without going through customs. But even with saying that, she lets him know that she's read quite a few books on Gotham and she's read up about him as well. And she gets into the perspective on Gotham from an international standpoint and not really just France, with the whole idea of Gordon using a bat signal being controversial, as well as him being commissioner at the time and sanctioning a vigilante, which for Gordon, of course, this isn't the way that he would express it, but nonetheless is the truth. And in a way it almost feels like it's leaning towards the conversation he had with the Joker not long ago, when the Joker told Gordon about himself and how he was enabling Batman and using Batman. And it's here where Gordon goes on the defensive, saying that Gotham is a unique city, and it's for that reason he used what he could in order to get things done. And he defends his argument on saying Gotham is unique because he also points out from the time that he's come to France, he hasn't seen any teenage bird ninjas fighting clowns. But when he says that, Detective Howells, she then makes a very valid point, because in Gotham City, just because people throw on costumes and they dress up their traumas to make things look more rare or unique, but underneath it all, they're not too different from the rest of the world, because there are gangsters and killers around the globe to whom more often than not, they're just not as flashy. And she gives him the benefit of the doubt, letting him know like, yeah, okay, so there are a number of heroes around the world and villains who do dress up, but in the United States, there's just way more. And that's something that's noticed from a global perspective, because for Detective Hollows, her division specifically deals with American heroes and villains who operate overseas, which is why for her, other colleagues in other divisions, they'll refer to her as Madam Halloween, because internationally, superhero or supervillain investigations are more novel. But even with her colleagues kind of teasing her with the Madam Halloween thing, she admits that she's been tempted to buy like all black and orange Hermes in like a ton of outfits and just have that be her costume. And she playing, but Steve Harvey would do it. But no, really, I believe he would. But then it's here where Gordon asks her like, what do you want from me? And when she tells him like, I'd rather hear from you, like, what do you think I want? And it's here where Gordon puts it together, like he knows that her job right now, it's a novelty type of thing, because American superheroes and supervillains, they rarely cross overseas and get into anything substantial. And if Gordon was to help her out by catching the Joker, and throughout that process give her more information on the network and the players behind it, then this would give her a huge advantage in front of her higher ups, because then she would be able to track criminal activity on a global scale. And when he tells her, like, in response, she's like, yeah, you're right. But with saying this, the deal that she's proposing is that if Gordon gives her something actionable on the network, she'll give him all the resources he needs in order to apprehend the Joker and take him back to Gotham. But then for Gordon, he's kind of like, well, what if I didn't want to exactly apprehend the Joker, you know what I'm saying? But when he says that, like, she doesn't mind if the Joker's caught dead or alive. But the one thing that she does ask is that nobody knows that they're working together. But as soon as she says that, Gordon's then like, that might be a problem. And the reason why is because Vengeance is standing right over her shoulder, and she doesn't like this plan or negotiation whatsoever. And with Vengeance just creeping up on Detective Hollows, she gets the strap, and rather quickly too, like it's a knee-jerk reaction. But that does her no good when Vengeance just crushes her hand. And mind you, this whole time, Vengeance just has the calmest expression ever, like this is nothing. But then when Gordon goes to stop Vengeance, which, you know, like that's not gonna happen. But then it's here where Vengeance just tears off Detective Hollow's arm, just rips it right off, and like the look on Gordon's face is like, how is this life right now? Like he can't believe this is happening. But it's here where Vengeance tells him like, I told you to go home, Mr. Gordon. But at this point, that's no longer an option, and you're coming with me. And from there, she just puts Gordon in a chokehold, he passes out, and she tosses him in the backseat of a car. And when Gordon wakes up, he's more or less just like, oh hell nah, this seemed like a job for Batman, where my red phone at? But even with him thinking this, he stops for a minute, and he thinks again like, okay, well wait, why am I in this car? Because if she wanted me dead, she could have easily made that happen earlier. But from here forward, it's just all bad for the authorities. She rips off the car door, and she takes it live and direct into one dude's neck. She then takes down another officer, snatches his gun, to then take out another two behind the next car. And to top it all off, she then takes down the chopper with the same car door she just ripped off. But then just after this, for Vengeance, like right after she just handles the authorities, she picks up Gordon, tosses him over her shoulder, takes him to a boat, and after that, they're out of there. But then of course for Gordon, it's here where he just has a ton of questions, of course. And like for starters, he wants to know if Isabella or Detective Hollows, like if she's still alive. And Vengeance lets him know like Interpol, they came, they intercepted her, and if their medics are competent, then she'll live. And it's just like, man, cold world. But Gordon is just going off because the way that Vengeance had came in, it was definitely extreme. And he lets her know like there's no need for that because he doesn't even think that Interpol knew who she was. And while they're on the topic, Gordon then asks who she is because he's seen her before, but it's here where she tells him her name is Vengeance. But then when he asks her like who does she work for, like whose vengeance are you? And she responds by telling him that's what she's trying to decide. And it's pretty much from here where we go into story time. Because it's here where Vengeance lets Gordon know that her and some of her men, they went to the laboratory in Paris on a mission where she believed that she was in charge of, because her orders from the higher ups was to head to this lab, catch the Joker. But as soon as she got there, her men, they just started burning down the lab, which right away let her know that somebody was trying to hide something. But also while her men were burning down this lab, the fire then revealed that there was a lower portion that the authorities hadn't gotten to yet. And when she went down to check it out, this is where she found like the real secrets, because it was down here where the significant work for the lab was being done, because it was down here where she found DNA samples for pretty much every notable villain and hero, with the exception of Batman because his was just missing. But then on top of that, she then found a folder that had a sticky note on it left by the Joker, much like he had wanted her to see this or he wanted her to find it. And on top of the folder, it read Bane Mark II Vengeance. And it was inside this folder to where Vengeance discovered how she was made and why. because in this file it starts with the original Bane, and it talks about how his project had went too well as far as the experiments that gave him venom, which gave him super strength, but it also goes on to say that Bane's hatred for Batman, which he had internalized so deeply, he didn't notice that it was planted there. But overall, they considered Bane to be far from a failure because of the symbol he established himself to be, the strength he represented for their island, and the way that he caused other nations to fear them. But even with him coming along with all these benefits, he was impossible to control. And that's why the leaders of Santa Prisca made a deal with this laboratory in order for them to build a new Bane. But this time, with the use of more advanced conditioning, they wanted to build a Bane that they could control. One that would be addicted to venom from birth, who wouldn't question any orders. And Vengeance tells Gordon, like, when she discovered all this, to only then find her quote-unquote team burning down the lab because the higher ups just wanted to bury this secret forever, and from there she just killed everyone on that team and more or less had just went her own way since. And really with this happening, like, the leaders of Santa Prisca, they set themselves up, because you just don't go and create another Bane without thinking that that leadership and that hunger for liberty and those core attributes are just not going to be there. Because now they've pretty much just created another Bane, who from here forward is just going to do what she feels like needs to be done in the way that she feels like it needs to be done. But with hearing this origin story, Gordon's then like, okay, well, you finna kill me now? But she tells him no, which I feel like is pretty clear because, you know, once again, she would have been done it if that was really what she wanted to do. So then of course, Gordon then asks, like, what does she want with him? And in response, she tells him, your passion. And I ain't gonna front, for a minute there, I was like, wait a minute, where's this going? And Gordon kind of looks like he was thinking the same. But Vengeance lets Gordon know that he's old, he's lived a long time, he's tried to do the right thing, and like her, he's on a hunt for the Joker. And it's from here, when she tells Gordon what she would do to the Joker if he were here, like, this part gets pretty extreme. Because she lets Gordon know, like, her hate for the Joker, it's been programmed into her. So if he were there or in the moment to where she gets her opportunity, she wouldn't be able to control it. Like, that hatred or that programming, it would just take over. And she's played this scenario out in her mind a number of times over, because all of the times that she was put into an artificial sleep, like, this is what she would dream of. And it's pretty detailed because it starts with ripping the Joker's tongue out with a heated iron, removing his fingernails and rubbing salt in the wounds, break his bones one by one, and doing this ever so carefully so he doesn't just slip into shock too quick. But then when he does finally die, she would then bury him in a place far away from Gotham, like a place in the world that meant absolutely nothing to the Joker. But then after burying him, she would then wait there for a week just to make sure he was dead and nobody came back and got him. Then she would just dig him back up and burn his body, so that the wind can then just carry his ashes until nothing was left. And when hearing this, it just kind of has me like, man, like, who wrote the code for her hatred? Like, there's a dude somewhere in Santa Prisca who's just like, oh yeah, put that in there too. He like, no, she gonna bury him, right? And she gonna stay there and she gonna dig him back up, man. Like, whoever that dude was, he really had time that day. But then again, this whole thing is designed with Santa Prisca getting their revenge on the Joker for killing Bane, because that's what they believe at this point. And it's really the reason why that extreme hatred was just imposed on her. But with Vengeance discovering the truth that she had learned in the lab, she no longer wants to execute her purpose for her generals. But because her hate for the Joker is just wired into her, she'll never be free until the Joker's dead. And she pretty much lets Gordon know, like, whatever the reasoning is for why Gordon wants to kill the Joker, she would rather stand behind him and kill the Joker for Gordon instead. And she fervently asks him, like, Jim Gordon, let me be your vengeance. And when she says that, like, it's pretty crazy the way that this thing is flipped around. But even with her making this offer, I really like how Vengeance notices, in the case of Gordon, like, why does this good man come across the world in order to stalk the Joker and kill him? But she also lets him know, like, the last time they had met in Belize, she saw how Gordon hesitated. And she knows that though Gordon wants to, like, given the opportunity, he's just not gonna go through with it. But in the case of Vengeance, she's one, wired to do this, but then secondly, this is her only opportunity to truly be free and determine her own path in life. And with hearing all this, Gordon, he's pretty much like, well, it's not a bad deal, but he just doesn't know where the Joker is. But Vengeance tells him that's not a problem because she does. Because the chief scientist of that lab, he has another lab on his private estate in Majorca, Spain. And because Vengeance didn't see the chief scientist amongst the dead scientists, she's come to the conclusion that the Joker has taken him there in order to accomplish what he's looking to truly achieve. And who knows what that might be? It may have something to do with the missing Batman DNA. Like, who knows? Or it could be 2 more Jokers, so we can get 3 Jokers again. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below, so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.